Now, I'm just going to do 2 seconds of economics for you. Off-air broadcasting has always been what economists call a public good. A public good has 2 characteristics. One is you can't exclude anybody from using it, and B, when they do use it, they don't interfere with anybody else's enjoyment. And it's usually contrasted with a commodity. A commodity would be something like a cinema ticket. When the cinema's full, no one else can come in, and unless we have quickly developed a very much more intimate relationship that is usually possible in these situations, we can't both sit in the same seat. So, lots of cultural goods are commodities. But public broadcasting has always been a public good in the sense that it was universal, non-exclusive, and it didn't interfere with other people. So it was a massive mechanism for inclusion, which was why it was so attractive both to governments, but also, of course, to corporations. But it's also, public broadcasting has also been a public good in the more philosophical sense. It's always been seen as an activity that aimed to contribute to the quality of communal life and to the development of democratic culture. Now, other public institutions also shared this ideal, but what public broadcasting did was to become a gathering up place for initiatives that had been fragmented in many other institutions, adult educational institutions, libraries, museums, galleries, publicly sponsored concerts. A long tradition of public subsidy of cultural activity outside the market. But these institutions had a crippling disability, which was space and location. They could not be universal in the way that broadcasting was. You had to go to the gallery to see the painting. And if you were unfortunate enough to go on a day when everybody else turned up, you couldn't actually see the painting because there'd be 15 people standing in front of it. So they had the problem of space and location. The internet actually for the first time allows all public institutions to universalise their activities. And so you see now a massive amount of activity. Libraries, archives, museums, galleries are all going online and trying to make the whole of their holdings available to everybody without discrimination. A good example would be the Tate Gallery, Tate Britain in London. When the great British artist Turner died, he left all of his work to the nation. But because he was fiercely productive, didn't seem to go to sleep, enormous amount of stuff. And the Tate Gallery has a new wing on it, which was specifically to house some Turners, but they could only get a few of them in there. So nobody has ever been able to see all the Turners. They've always been in the basement. They bring a couple of them up occasionally. Thousands and thousands of them. They're now all on the net. So if you're at all interested in art, you can actually have a look at everything the man ever did. You can watch it chronologically, you can compare it thematically, you can compare it by his change in style, you can play with it. This is fantastic. If you go to the Smithsonian Institute site, you'll see they've had some of the very first movies made in the world, made by Edison. You can download them for nothing. So all of these public institutions are now beginning to come online. So we have an enormous repository of publicly available material of all kinds. One of the institutions that is problematic is, I have to say, universities. Because traditionally lectures and publications have been considered intellectual property. Either the intellectual property of the individual scholar, or increasingly, in some British universities, they're trying to force new staff to sign a contract that says that all of the intellectual property they produce belongs to the university, which they will sell. One university, which will be nameless, tried to enforce a contract where all the lecture notes, if a member of staff left, they would have to leave every piece of paper they'd ever written on in their office. They couldn't take them to their new institution in case the university could sell them for distance learning. So that scholarship becomes another commodity to be traded, and it can be very valuable. But there's a counter-movement to this. The idea of the Creative Commons, which is promoting a new kind of copyright. The Creative Commons license says that you have the right to use my work freely, providing you don't use it for commercial purposes. And many scholars and artists are now signing such rights. One of the great victories, the faculty of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology have agreed, and this includes Naomi Chomsky, have agreed to put all of their lectures on the web for free, on the grounds that the public already own them. Because it's a public institution, you as the public have a right to my knowledge. You've already paid for it. I'm being paid from taxation. You shouldn't have to pay again. This is a very important principle, and it's going to open up all sorts of material, including the BBC's archives. The BBC has a plan which they call the Creative Archive, where they're going to, in the same spirit, put all of their past programmes on the web for anyone to use for nothing, providing they don't reuse them for commercial purposes. So we're looking at a profound intervention which will reconfigure both the availability of publicly funded material around the world and also allow it to be used actively in all sorts of ways. But there's also another counter-principle to the commodity, the philosophy of gifts. A good example would be Wikipedia. Wikipedia is the largest encyclopedia in world history. It's been compiled entirely from voluntary contributions, and it's based on a philosophy of reciprocity. I post an entry because I know something about X. I don't ask you to pay me anything, but we do enter into a social contract. I expect that if you know something that might interest me, you in turn will post it and make it available to me. So we have a non-money, non-commodity system that's capable of producing an amazingly complex repository of human knowledge. Also, a repository that's open to correction and dispute. All the Wikipedia entries are continually being revised by other people. So it's a collaborative system. And so we have three economies on the internet. You have the economy of commodities, paid for by prices. Once you've paid, you own what you paid for, but you're a consumer. You can take it or leave it. We have an economy of public goods, paid for out of taxation, based on the principle of free public access, and as you enter that, you're a citizen in the traditional sense. But we have also a third economy, an economy of gifts, based on reciprocity, it's collective production, and you are part of the process of production. You're not a recipient, you're an active participant in creating this repository for other people. Now, broadcasters have also gone online. But if you look at most of the commercial broadcasting sites, they're there basically to cement loyalty among their audiences. But they have the potential, and this is the potential that some of the public broadcasters are beginning to understand, to do something much more ambitious than that. They have the potential to be the key node in a network that would join together the products of this philosophy of public goods and the gift economy. Now, why do I nominate public broadcasting as this privileged point of entry? Well, I think it has three advantages over every other institution. First of all, it's familiar. It's already in everybody's house. People enjoy it. They know what television is. Integrating internet capacity into the TV set would not be a great shock to people. They're already used to using the television for other things. Teletext, for example, is very widely used everywhere that it's available. And it's used in much the same way that people use the internet. People check the news headlines, they check the weather, they look for travel bargains, and so on. So teletext, which has been around for almost a quarter of a century, is already an ancillary project. People are very used to using video recorders of all kinds as a logical part of the television. So the idea that what is on the screen is the only thing that television does hasn't been true for a very long time. So I think television is as a medium, is very well placed to integrate the internet into its next generation of digital sets. This will not be easy because there's a great push the other way. Bill Gates and the computer industry want to bring television into the computer. They want computers to be the place where people would watch movies, watch downloaded programs and so on. And you shouldn't underestimate how ambitious they are to do that. So there's going to be a big struggle over the machine, whether it's a computer-enhanced television or a television-enhanced computer. That's the first struggle. Television, and particularly public broadcasting, has two other massive advantages. First of all, it is highly trusted. Despite all the grumpiness that people have about public broadcasting, when it comes down to the wire, it's the same with universities. People trust them. They trust them not to sell them anything, and they trust them to behave by and large in the public interest. If you ask people about trust, why do you trust some things and not others? Those are the two criteria. I don't want to be sold something. I don't want somebody just to be doing it for their own private gain. So the idea of public interest, the idea that there should be some things which are simply there because they have a public value, is actually deeply ingrained in the way people look at the world. And public broadcasters have very high levels of public trust, precisely because they don't try to sell things. And that means that they're potentially able to be, I would say, the portal of choice for people. The challenge is for public broadcasters to play this role in what I call the digital commons. I call it the digital commons because the history of the commons was a history of the struggle against the enclosure of communal space. We see the same process now, not in terms of land, but in terms of the space of the imagination. It's being enclosed by two things. It's being enclosed by commerce, but it's being enclosed by fundamentalist movements of all kinds that are forcing people to make choices between one side or another, breaking apart any concept of deliberation. The digital commons would be the space that opposes both of those tendencies. And because of the high levels of trust, broadcasting has the potential to do that in a way that no other institution has. Familiarity plus trust allows broadcasters to become a presence on the net, not just for themselves, but as a gateway to all these other resources. And they have one other massive advantage. They have the potential to counter the individualization and fragmentation of experience. This used to be done in broadcasting, the philosophy of mixed programming, where you'd have all sorts of different programs, one after the other. And the idea of that was that people who tuned in or wanted to watch something they already liked would stay on for the programme next. And they might be surprised by the fact that they didn't expect to be interested, but they found something that they really engaged their attention. You crept up on them by stealth. Mixed programming is really gone as a strategy. The competitive strategy is about channel branding and promoting the channel identity, and that's cut across. But web surfing allows exactly the same process. When you go into a website, like the BBC's website, you might go in because you're a fan of EastEnders, for example, but you see an enormous array of other things, and you might think, oh, actually, I might have a look at that. So web surfing actually allows people, or the way people behave now, pulls them in directions simply out of curiosity. So that's a plus. But even if they go in because their interest has been triggered by a particular programme they've watched, that still provides some basis in shared experience. And the BBC has been recently very good at orchestrating kind of shared experience of that kind, and has been very successful in getting people involved in all sorts of projects. So we're looking at a situation where broadcasters have to think of themselves as no longer a standalone institution, but as a privileged node in a network, so that the responsibility of public broadcasting in the future will not simply be to continue to make programmes, but it will be to organise this digital commons, to make it possible for people to make the best of all the material that's out there, and to be helped to navigate their way through it. Now, as I say, there are huge barriers to that, which we shouldn't underestimate. Not only the commercial push from the other side, but the substantial costs. This is not going to be a cheap option. Certainly not going to be a cheap option for broadcasters. It's going to require more public money. And it won't initially be a cheap option for viewers and listeners. They will have to buy new digital sets. But they're going to have to do that anyway, because the analog signals will be switched off. So this is the moment where we can begin to envisage a much broader view of television, not just as a load more channels, but as something much more ambitious, and something that would finally overcome the contradictions that have bedeviled broadcasting, partly because of its technological limitations, but also because of its social and political fix. So I see this as a really decisive moment. If we lose this battle, I think we face a very bleak future. I think public broadcasting will become more marginal, and I think it will deserve to be more marginal. If it does not take this opportunity, I also think we will not have, in any real sense of the term, a democratic society, and I think citizenship will become so thin as to be almost transparent. If you want to live in a society that is dominated by the landscape of consumerism, and this is a landscape that has now spread across the entire world, then do nothing. But if you don't want that, and I certainly don't want that, then this is the moment. We have a window of opportunity, as they say, but it will close. It will be kicked shut, and it will be nailed shut if we don't keep it open. So I come to you with a utopian proposition. But I'd finish with a quotation from Bertolt Brecht. If you consider that utopian, I would ask you to consider why. Thank you.